In 12 days in the spring of 1944, one small American warship did something that has never been done before or since in the history of naval warfare. She sank 6 enemy submarines. 6 in 12 days, with a weapon most captains in the United States Navy refused to trust. Her name was USS England. She was named after a 21-year-old Ensign who died aboard the USS Oklahoma at Pearl Harbor on the morning of December 7th, 1941. His body was never recovered. His mother christened the ship that would carry his name into battle. 3 years later, the ship that carried his name would kill more than 300 Japanese sailors in less than 2 weeks. This is the story of how it happened. And this is the story of why almost no one remembers it today. The clock read 13:25, May 19th, 1944. North of Bougainville, the Pacific was flat and gray, a low overcast pressed down on the sea. The afternoon light was thin, filtered, colorless. Just the soft hiss of water sliding along the hull of a warship that most sailors in the fleet had never heard of. Inside the Combat Information Center of USS England, a man leaned over the sonar console and did not move. He had been standing in that same position for 11 minutes. His name was Walton B. Pendleton. He was 37 years old. He was the commanding officer of this ship, and in his entire naval career, he had never sunk a submarine, not one. The sonar operator kept his voice low, the way men do when they know something terrible is listening. Contact bearing 035. Range 1,500 yards. Depth uncertain. Speed 6 knots. Pendleton nodded once. He did not speak. Somewhere beneath the gray water, a Japanese submarine called I-16 was moving through the deep. She carried 107 men. She carried supplies for the starving garrison at Bougainville. She carried the confidence of a submarine service that had, until this moment, dominated the Pacific. The men aboard her did not know that an American destroyer escort was tracking them from above. They did not know that the American captain was not a hero. He was not a legend. He was, in the words of the naval bureaucracy that had assigned him, an unremarkable officer with an average record and a strange preference for reading mathematical tables in his cabin. They did not know that this ship carried a weapon most captains in the fleet refused to trust. USS England was small, 306 feet long, Buckley-class destroyer escort, 77 feet shorter than a fleet destroyer. Built quickly, built cheaply, built for one purpose and one purpose only: hunting submarines. She had been launched in September of 1943 at the Bethlehem Hingham Shipyard in Massachusetts. Her sponsor was Mrs. Harry B. England, the mother of a young ensign named John C. England, who had died at Pearl Harbor on the morning of December 7th, 1941. He had been 21 years old. He had been aboard the battleship USS Oklahoma when the Japanese torpedoes hit. His body was never recovered. They named the ship after him. The crew knew this. Every man aboard knew that they served on a vessel bearing the name of a boy who had died in the first hours of the war they were now fighting. It was written in the ship's history. It was carved into the metal, but the crew did not talk about it. Not on the surface, not in the mess, not in the crowded berthing compartments where sailors slept 3 high in canvas racks. They talked about the weapon. The weapon sat on her forward deck. 24 spigot mortars, arranged in 6 rows of 4. British engineers had designed it in 1941. The British had called it Hedgehog because the projectiles bristled from the launcher like the spines of the animal. American captains had another name for it. They called it useless. The numbers behind the reputation were brutal. Early trials showed a 5% success rate. 95 Hedgehog attacks out of every 100 produced nothing but silence and wasted ammunition. Sailors joked that the projectiles fell into the sea and simply disappeared, contact fuses and all, never touching a submarine, never proving they had ever existed. Depth charges, by contrast, made noise. Depth charges made the ocean tremble. Depth charges gave a captain the satisfaction of seeing the water rise in white columns behind his ship, of feeling the concussion in his boots, of believing that something terrible was happening below. Most captains preferred depth charges. Pendleton did not. He had read the numbers. He had read them carefully. British forces had conducted 5,174 depth charge attacks during the war. 85 confirmed submarine kills. 1 kill for every 60 attacks, a success rate of 1.6%. Hedgehog, even at its worst, was still 3 times better. And there was something else. Something the captains who trusted depth charges refused to acknowledge. When a destroyer dropped depth charges, she lost sonar contact. The explosions churned the water. The ping of the sound system returned nothing but chaos for 15 minutes. In 15 minutes, a submarine could travel more than a mile. Hedgehog fired forward. Sonar contact stayed unbroken. If the projectiles missed, the captain would know immediately. He could attack again, and again, and again. The mathematics of Hedgehog were the mathematics of patience. Walton Pendleton was a patient man. 4 days before this night, on May 15th, 1944, a signal had reached the desk of a commander at Fleet Radio Unit Pacific in Pearl Harbor. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific was the American cryptographic operation that had broken pieces of the Japanese naval code JN-25. Its work was so secret that the men who did it were forbidden from telling their own wives what they did for a living. Its intelligence product was called Ultra. Ultra was distributed to a handful of senior commanders who were forbidden from acting on it directly for fear that the Japanese would realize their code had been compromised. But this signal was too valuable to ignore. A Japanese submarine designated I-16 had transmitted her destination. Bougainville. Estimated arrival, 2200 hours, May 19th. She was carrying supplies for the isolated Japanese garrison. She would surface periodically to charge her batteries. Her route would take her across a specific patch of ocean north of the Solomons. The Americans knew exactly where she would be. Admiral William Halsey's headquarters at Noumea forwarded the intelligence to Escort Division 39. The division commander was Captain Hamilton Haynes, a career officer, aboard the destroyer escort USS George. Haynes was told the position. He was told the time. He was told nothing else. He assigned the mission to 3 ships, USS George, USS Raby, and the newest, most inexperienced of the 3, USS England. Nobody expected England to make the kill. Pendleton stood in the Combat Information Center and watched the range close. 1,500 yards, 1,300, 1,100. The sonar operator called out the numbers in a voice that had lost all inflection. This was his first submarine hunt, too. Every man aboard was on his first submarine hunt. The ship had been in commission for 7 months. She had crossed the Pacific. She had escorted convoys. She had done everything except the one thing she had been built to do. Now, at 1341, Pendleton gave the order, "Fire Hedgehog." 24 projectiles arched through the overcast afternoon sky, 65 pounds each, 35 pounds of Torpex, explosive in every warhead. They rose in a shallow parabola, splashed into the sea 200 yards ahead of the ship, and began to sink, 23 feet per second. The sonar operator kept his headphones pressed against his ears. Silence. Miss. Somewhere below, I-16 had turned. Her captain had heard the splashes. He had ordered a hard rudder, a change of depth, standard Japanese evasion tactics learned over 3 years of war. Pendleton did not react. He did not curse. He did not slam his hand on the console. He simply looked at the plot and calculated the next firing solution. Second attack. 1 detonation at approximately 130 feet. Not enough. Third attack. Miss. The fathometer revealed the truth. I-16 had gone deeper than anyone had estimated. 325 feet. Below the thermal layer, where sonar returns grew unreliable. Fourth attack. She had turned inside the pattern. 24 projectiles fell into empty water. The men on the bridge began to look at each other. 96 projectiles fired. 0 kills. This was the story of Hedgehog. This was why captains refused to use it. Pendleton did not look at his men. He looked at the plot. At 1433, he ordered the 5th attack. The projectiles left the launcher with a sound like coughing thunder. 24 splashes. Then the count, 1 detonation, 2, 3, 4. The sonar operator's voice cracked. Multiple hits, Captain. Multiple hits. Below the surface, at 300 feet, the pressure hull of I-16 was punctured in 4 places. Seawater began to enter at 400 gallons per minute through each 3-inch hole. The submarine's electric motors continued to turn. Her captain, whose name was Yoshitake Takeuchi, ordered emergency procedures. Blow the ballast tanks. Surface. Save the crew. The crew never reached the surface. At 1443, a massive underwater explosion tore through the deep. The pressure wave lifted USS England's stern clear of the sea. Sailors were knocked off their feet. Coffee cups slid off wardroom tables. The concussion rolled outward for miles. 20 minutes later, the debris began to appear. Oil, wood fragments, a single leather glove floating on a patch of iridescent water. 107 Japanese sailors were dead. USS England had sunk her first submarine. In the Combat Information Center, Pendleton wrote the entry in his log in a hand so steady that a junior officer, decades later, would remember it as the calmest handwriting he had ever seen. He did not celebrate. He did not smile. He did not permit the crew to cheer. He was thinking about the mathematics. 5 attacks. 1 kill. 20% success rate. 4 times better than the trials. And they had done it on their first hunt against an experienced Japanese captain. In deep water, in broad daylight. If the numbers held, England could do this again. She would have to. Because far to the north, at Fleet Radio Unit Pacific in Pearl Harbor, another Japanese message had just been decoded. The Imperial Navy had deployed 7 more submarines in a picket line stretching from Truk to Manus. The line was designated NA. Its purpose was to detect the American fleet before it struck the Marianas. 7 submarines, 392 Japanese sailors, and USS England was already being ordered to sail directly into their path. Vice Admiral Takeo Takagi received the confirmation at his headquarters on Saipan on the morning of May 20th. Takagi was 51 years old. He commanded the 6th Fleet, which controlled every operational submarine in the Imperial Japanese Navy. He had a reputation for competence and caution. He was known to be careful with the lives of his men. The report told him that I-16 had failed to make her scheduled transmission from Bougainville. Takagi did not panic. Submarines missed transmissions. Radios failed. Antennae broke. There were 100 reasons why a submarine could go silent for a day. The NA picket line was more important. The submarines assigned to that line were the eyes of the entire combined fleet. If they detected the American carriers moving toward the Marianas, Japan could position her defenses. If they failed, the Marianas would fall. If the Marianas fell, American bombers could reach Tokyo. Takagi gave the order to hold the line. The 7 submarines would remain on station. They would maintain radio silence except for emergency reports. They would surface only at night, only to charge batteries, only when absolutely necessary. He believed his instructions would keep them safe. He was wrong. 6 of those 7 submarines had less than 12 days to live. Aboard USS England, Walton Pendleton read the new orders and folded the paper carefully and put it in his pocket. He walked out onto the bridge wing. The sun was setting. The Pacific was calm. He looked at the 24 spigot mortars on the forward deck. He looked at his crew moving through their evening routines. He looked at the flag snapping in the trade wind. He did not know that in the coming days, an admiral in Washington would send him a message that would enter the permanent record of the United States Navy. He did not know that his ship would become the most successful submarine killer in the history of naval warfare. He did not know that decades after his death, in a museum in Washington, a rusted Hedgehog launcher would sit in a corner unlabeled, and visitors would walk past it without knowing what it had done. He knew only what the numbers told him. The numbers told him there were 6 more submarines waiting, and he intended to find every single one of them. The 3 ships left Purvis Bay on the morning of May 21st, 1944. USS England, USS George, USS Raby. 3 destroyer escorts, painted the color of storm clouds, moving north through waters that had already swallowed thousands of American boys. The Solomons lay behind them. Ahead of them lay the picket line, the Japanese, called NA. 7 submarines, 392 men. Somewhere out there in 3,000 square miles of open ocean, Captain Hamilton Haynes commanded the group from aboard USS George. He was a career officer. He had graduated from Annapolis 2 decades earlier. He had spent most of his adult life on ships, and he had learned something that the men who wrote naval doctrine sometimes forgot. He had learned that the ocean does not care about doctrine. The ocean does what it wants. The ships that survive are the ships whose captains adapt. Haynes had a plan. Line abreast formation. 16,000 yards between ships during darkness. Radar sweeps every 30 seconds. Sonar pinging continuously. The 3 destroyer escorts would move northeast along the line, where American intelligence said the Japanese submarines were waiting. They would find them one by one. At 0350 on May 22nd, USS George's radar operator saw a blip. 15,000 yards distant, surface contact, small, moving slowly. The submarine was RO-106. She was a Type KO. She was 213 feet long. She carried a crew of 56 men. Her captain had ordered her to the surface an hour earlier to charge her batteries. He believed the darkness protected him. The searchlight from USS George caught her at 9,000 yards. RO-106 crash dove in 90 seconds. Ballast tanks filled. The bow angled down. The submarine slipped beneath the waves and began her run for deep water. But the destroyer escorts were already turning to intercept. George fired Hedgehog at 0415. 24 projectiles arched through the pre-dawn darkness and splashed silently into the sea. Silence. Miss. USS England picked up the sonar contact at 0425. Range 1,400 yards. Pendleton stood in the Combat Information Center and watched the plot. The submarine was making radical turns, changing depth. The Japanese captain knew the tactics. He had trained for this moment his entire career. Pendleton watched the plot in silence. First attack missed. RO-106 had turned during the projectile's descent. 9 seconds was enough for a submarine to move 150 feet. Second attack at 0501. 3 detonations. Then a massive underwater explosion that rolled outward across the surface. The pressure wave shuddered through England's hull. It reached George and Raby 4,000 yards away. At sunrise, the oil slick was half a mile wide. 56 men. Kill number 2. 24 hours later, at 0600 on May 23rd, USS Raby's radar found another contact. 22,000 yards. The Japanese submarine was RO-104. Her captain dove before identification. He had learned something from RO-106's silence. He went deep. He stayed deep. He turned inside every attack pattern the Americans threw at him. Raby fired Hedgehog 4 times between 0617 and 0700. All misses. George moved in. First attack at 071. Second attack. Miss. Third attack. Miss. Fourth attack. Miss. Captain Haynes stood on the bridge of USS George and watched 2 hours of failure. His own ship, his own crew, his own Hedgehog projectiles falling into empty water, while the Japanese captain below did everything right. At 0830, Haynes keyed the radio. His voice carried across the open channel to every man aboard all 3 ships. Oh, hell. Go ahead, England. 5 words. In the years to come, those 5 words would be printed in naval histories, repeated in wardrooms, carved into memory. But at that moment, aboard USS England, Walton Pendleton did not react to the words. He reacted to the plot. His first attack missed. RO-104 turned. His second attack at 0834 produced 10 detonations, maybe 12. The explosions merged into a single continuous roar. Then, 3 minutes later, a secondary blast as the submarine's batteries ruptured deep beneath the surface. 56 more men. Kill number 3, 3 days. 3 submarines. 163 Japanese sailors dead. And England still had 4 targets ahead of her. At 0120 on May 24th, George's radar found RO-116 on the surface. Her captain had changed tactics. When England's sonar picked her up at 0150, the submarine was running shallow, 150 feet. Most Japanese captains dove deep. RO-116's captain bet on the opposite. He believed the Americans would set their firing solutions for depth. He bet wrong. Pendleton's sonar operator called out the shallow reading. The firing solution adjusted. First attack at 0214. 3 detonations. Then 5. 65-pound projectiles punched 3-inch holes through the pressure hull at 723 feet per second. At 150 feet depth, seawater enters a submarine at 400 gallons per minute through each hole. The temperature inside rises past 200 degrees, then 300. Men's lungs sear. Within 6 minutes, everyone aboard is dead. Kill number 4. 56 more men, 219 total. The message reached Admiral Ernest King in Washington later that day. King was the chief of naval operations. He commanded every ship in the United States Navy. He was 65 years old. He was known throughout the fleet as the most difficult man in the American war effort. He did not praise his officers. He did not send congratulatory messages. He sent orders. But he read the action report from Escort Division 39. 1 destroyer escort. 4 confirmed kills in 5 days against experienced Japanese commanders in deep water. King picked up his pen. The message he sent to the Pacific Fleet contained 9 words that entered the permanent record of the United States Navy. There will always be an England in the United States Navy. The phrase reached every ship in the Pacific within hours. It was read aloud on mess decks. It was posted on bulletin boards. Sailors who had never heard of USS England before that morning suddenly knew her name. But fame brought consequences. Vice Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding the Fifth Fleet from his flagship USS Indianapolis, considered pulling England from the hunt. She had become too valuable. Her crew had become too experienced. Experienced crews were rare. Experienced destroyer, escort crews were rarer still. Spruance sent word to Escort Division 39. Consider withdrawal. Hamilton Haynes sent his answer back through the radio. 3 submarines remained. England was killing them at the rate of 1 per day. If she was pulled now, the mission would be incomplete. Japanese submarines would continue reporting American fleet movements. The intelligence advantage would collapse. Spruance authorized 1 more patrol. 2 days later, on May 26th at 23:003, USS Raby's radar found RO-108 at 15,000 yards, 110 nautical miles northeast of Settler Harbor. The submarine Dove. USS England gained sonar contact at 1,650 yards. The Japanese captain made the same mistake as RO-116. Shallow water, radical turns. He believed the Americans could not track him. Pendleton's crew had tracked 4 submarines. They knew every evasion, every depth change, every turn. At 2323, USS England commenced her Hedgehog attack. 4 projectiles hit, perhaps 6. The explosions came so close together, they sounded like a single roar. RO-108's pressure hull ruptured at multiple points simultaneously. The submarine did not sink slowly. She imploded. 56 men died in less than 3 seconds. Kill number 5, 6 days. 275 Japanese sailors dead. At 6th Fleet headquarters on Saipan, Vice Admiral Takeo Takagi read the silence. 5 submarines had gone dark on the NA line. No distress calls, no emergency transmissions, nothing but empty ocean where his eyes were supposed to be. Takagi understood. Now, something was killing his submarines. Something fast, something accurate, something the Japanese submarine captains could not evade. He issued new orders on May 27th. Minimum patrol depth, 400 feet. No battery charging unless absolutely necessary. No radical maneuvers which produced noise. At first detection, run silent. The orders were sound. The orders were correct. The orders reached RO 105. They did not reach in time. 2 Japanese submarines still remained on the NA line, somewhere in 3,000 square miles of Pacific Ocean. Aboard USS England, the fire control officer completed his inventory that evening. Each Hedgehog attack fired 24 projectiles. 5 attacks had expended 120 rounds. USS England had launched with 240 rounds total. 120 remained. 5 attacks left, perhaps a 6th if the loaders were careful. Pendleton read the report and folded it and placed it on the chart table. He looked out through the porthole at the sunset over the western Pacific. Somewhere beyond the horizon, in the black water, RO 105 was moving. Her captain would be the best they had faced. He would prove it. The last submarine was the hardest. On the night of May 30th, at 21:45, USS George's radar picked up RO 105 on the surface. The submarine dove immediately. But her captain did not run. He did not turn. He did not do any of the things the 5 dead men before him had done. He killed his engines. Every motor stopped. Every pump, every fan. The submarine hung motionless at 400 feet, drifting with the current, silent as a stone, on the ocean floor. USS England established sonar contact at 1,200 yards. The signal was weak, intermittent. The kind of return sonar operators called a knuckle, a patch of disturbed water that could hide a submarine anywhere within 200 yards of the plot. Pendleton faced a choice. Fire Hedgehog at a weak contact and almost certainly miss, burning 24 of the 120 projectiles he had left. Or wait. He waited. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3, then 4. The Japanese captain below was gambling with the lives of 56 men. He knew his batteries were dying. He knew that when he moved, the Americans would hear him. He knew that when he surfaced, the Americans would be waiting. But he also knew something the 5 captains before him had not known. He knew that human beings, even trained naval officers, cannot maintain perfect concentration forever. He was betting that the Americans would look away. At 0230 on May 31st, he made his move, but not where England expected. RO 105 had drifted 3 miles during those 4 silent hours, carried by the current far outside the search pattern. When she finally surfaced at 0315, USS George's radar found her at 13,000 yards. in the wrong direction, at the wrong bearing. The hunting group had been looking in the wrong grid square. By the time England turned toward the new contact, RO-105 had already crash-dived. But she had bought herself 90 seconds of diesel time, enough to add 10% to her batteries, enough to run. England regained sonar contact at 0345. The submarine was running deep and fast. 6 knots, heading northeast, away from the hunting group, away from the killing zone. The Japanese captain was good. He was, in the professional judgment of every American officer who fought him that night, the best they had faced. Pendleton fired Hedgehog at 0405. The projectiles fell into black water, 23 feet per second, 17 seconds to reach depth. In 17 seconds, a submarine moving at 6 knots traveled 170 feet, miss by 200 feet. Second attack at 0423, miss by 100 feet. England had now fired 48 of her remaining projectiles. 72 rounds left. 3 attacks, perhaps 3.5, and RO-105 was still moving. At 0447, the sonar operator saw it. The Japanese captain was turning 30 degrees to port. Then, 4 minutes later, 30 degrees to starboard, then back again. He believed his pattern was random. He believed no human observer could predict him. But humans are not random. Under stress, in darkness, with the lives of 56 men on their shoulders, humans fall into rhythms they cannot see themselves. Pendleton adjusted the firing solution. He led the target by 200 feet. He fired the third attack at 0508. 4 detonations. Perhaps 5, not the massive explosion of previous kills. RO-105 was breached, but not broken. She continued moving. Fluting, but not sinking. Her captain was executing emergency procedures. Blow the ballast tanks. Surface. Save what he could of his men. Pendleton fired the 4th attack at 0532. 8 detonations. The submarine broke apart. The emergency blow stopped. The men aboard never reached the surface. Oil and debris appeared at 0615 as the sun came up over the Pacific. Kill number 6. 12 days. 335 Japanese sailors dead. There was 1 submarine left on the NA line. ROO-109. American destroyer escorts searched for her for 3 more days. They found nothing. RO-109 had received Vice Admiral Takagi's withdrawal order after RO-108's death. Her captain had turned north and run for Truk. He would be alive. ROO-109 survived the war. She surrendered to Allied forces in August 1945. Her crew learned only then that 6 of their sister submarines had been destroyed by a single American ship in 12 days. They learned it was a ship they had never heard of. They learned it used a weapon they had never seen. They learned that they had lived because an order had come 1 day earlier than the shells. The Presidential Unit citation arrived in July 1944. USS England was one of only 3 destroyer escorts in the entire war to receive it. The citation was brief. It did not mention Walton Pendleton by name. It did not mention Hamilton Haynes. It did not mention the sonar operators or the Hedgehog crews or the fire control officers or the loaders who had worked in the ammunition magazines below the waterline, while explosions echoed through the hull. It said only this: for extraordinary heroism in action against enemy Japanese submarines, Pendleton received the Navy Cross, a single decoration for 6 submarines. He did not display it. He kept it in a drawer. He continued in command of USS England through the summer. Convoy escort, carrier screening, anti-submarine patrols. She never found another submarine. She never fired Hedgehog in combat again. On the morning of May 9, 1945, USS England was operating as a radar picket ship off the coast of Okinawa. The war in Europe had ended the day before. In the Pacific, the fighting was moving toward Japan itself. A single Japanese aircraft came out of the low clouds at 0714. The pilot's name is not recorded. His age is not recorded. He was almost certainly under 25. He had been trained to do one thing. The aircraft struck USS England at the base of the bridge. The bomb penetrated deep into the hull. 35 American sailors were killed. 27 more were wounded. The damage was catastrophic. Walton Pendleton was no longer her commanding officer. He had rotated to a new assignment months earlier. The men who died aboard England that morning had never sunk a submarine. They had never known Pendleton. They had known only the ship and the name she carried, and the ensign who had died at Pearl Harbor in December of 1941. USS England was towed to Philadelphia. The Navy examined her. The repairs would cost more than a new ship. The Navy decided she was not worth saving. She was sold for scrap in November 1946. The ship that sank 6 submarines in 12 days ended her life in a Philadelphia salvage yard, cut apart for razor blades and tin cans. Walton Pendleton stayed in the Navy for another 16 years. He was promoted. He commanded other ships. He served in Alaska during the final year of the war, hunting Japanese submarines in the North Pacific. He never found any. He retired in 1961, 34 years of service. He died in 1973. He was 66 years old. He is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. His gravestone mentions the Navy Cross. It does not mention the 6 submarines. It does not mention the 12 days. In October of 1960, the Navy commissioned a new ship, guided missile destroyer leader USS England, hull number DLG-22, later reclassified as a guided missile cruiser. She served for 32 years, longer than the original England had lasted. She was decommissioned in 1994. There has not been a USS England in the United States Navy since. Admiral Ernest King's promise made in the spring of 1944, was kept for 50 years. Then it was quietly forgotten. The original Hedgehog launcher sits today in storage at the National Museum of the United States Navy in Washington, D.C. It is rusted. It is unlabeled. Most visitors walk past it without noticing. The placard nearby mentions the weapon's success rate. It does not mention USS England. It does not mention Pendleton. It does not mention the 12 days that proved the mathematics. 335 Japanese sailors died in those 12 days. They died in steel compartments at depths where the sea pressure crushes a man's chest before the heat cooks his lungs. Most of them were younger than the American sailors who killed them. Most of them had families. Most of them believed in the last seconds of their lives that their deaths meant something. The Americans who killed them did not celebrate. Pendleton wrote his log entries in the same steady handwriting he had used before the first attack. Haynes sent his after-action reports up the chain of command. The crew of USS England did their jobs and went to their bunks and got up the next morning and did their jobs again. They were not heroes in the way the newsreels wanted them to be heroes. They were men who trusted numbers when other men trusted tradition. They were men who did a terrible thing very well, 6 times in 12 days in the black water north of the Bismarcks in the spring of 1944. And then the world moved on, and the ship was scrapped, and the launchers rusted, and the men grew old, and the ocean, as it always does, closed over everything and forgot.